We've gone over a few of the basics, different things that you should have in your broadcast stories. Now let's talk about putting together a story, so your story structure. Now, just like with other news writing and other media writing, we want to answer the 5 W's and 1 H here. And as a reminder, those are who, what, when, where, why, and how. So who's involved, what happened, and usually when we talk about what happened, we want to frame that in the sense of the people who were involved. So what happened to whom? When did something happen? Where did it happen? Why did it happen? And how did it happen? So again, we're looking at events and figuring out who the key participants are in this. And how can we explain this in a way where our audience is invested and they want to know what happened and understand what's going on and how it affects them, if it does? So you can refer to the inverted pyramid for the basics. The inverted pyramid, again, we're looking at a lead, body, and tail. And whenever we expanded the inverted pyramid, that meant that we added in those extra details, bridge, and background information that led us into our body and tail. So again, inverted pyramid is lead, body, tail. Expanded inverted pyramid, lead, bridge, background, body, and tail. And that's going to be the longer version of what we're doing here as well. If that style helps you to understand what's going on, if you do a package report for something, you want to include those extra pieces of information in there. But a lot of times when we're writing for broadcast, we're looking at a very short time frame. We want to get the most important information to our audience, the things that if we give you these bullet points of information, you will essentially understand what's going on, why the story is important, what happened, still answering those 5 W's and 1 H. So again, we're going from expanded inverted pyramid into what we're going to call the broadcast pyramid. And this is the way it's laid out in the AP style book when we talk about broadcasting. They refer to it as lead, backup, details, and background. I threw in that extra tail part at the end because that is really what we're doing when we're looking at broadcasting. And we're still going to have some kind of way to wrap up the segment. Often when we're looking at these, though, we're going to have something that is focused primarily on the lead. Sometimes we'll have a little bit of like a backup or detail section in there for, and that's for our very short stories, those readers. And you can still break it down into more sections if you want, as you'll see in our example. But we're still focused on delivering very quick pieces of important information. So what's in a story? Like I said, we have a lead, so essential facts, often in broadcasting, especially more than any other media, we're looking at the newest information here. Backup, so what part of the story is going to help our audience best understand what's going on? So this is where we're backing up the lead with more specific information, answering why or how something happened. Details, so additional important facts, direct quotes, and facts from the story. And this could be like if you're writing a voiceover with a soundbite, your details portion will probably be your soundbite at the end. And then we have a background section. This is where we're adding perspective. It could be historical or so not necessarily historical in the sense of being ancient, but historical in the sense of this is the history that led up to this current point in time. And this would be different from whenever we have a information that's pertinent to the lead in a very immediate way. So if in the backup section, we're looking at those things that are going to be the most important to this particular aspect of the story, this lead relating to what's going on, which is why when you hear a broadcast, you'll notice, especially for more detailed stories where you have maybe 3 or 4 different short stories that are making up this description, longer description of what's going on. Like if you have 3 15-second segments and then you have a minute 30 package that goes along with it, you're going to have different leads and different pieces of backup information that are used as your focal points. And then we're adding details and background as needed in them to help our audience understand that particular part of the story. And also, I added the tail ending in there as well. Um, Even though it in the Associated Press style book, they don't they call it the background. It's really more of what we've come to know as a tail in that inverted pyramid, where we need some way to round out the story, either giving our audience a call to action for those stories where we want people to, like if we have a family who is recovering from a house fire, usually we have their GoFundMe information at the end. Or if we have a story where someone might need to call a phone number or they might want to attend an event, then we'll have that event information included again at the end with it. And we might have, if we have a slightly longer story where we're going to include where a direct quote feels like the best way to end it, then that could be our ending as well. So it's one of those where all of these do have a little movement as far as what should be included in there, but they're going to change depending on what kind of story you're building, and also what you're including in the lead to help support that lead. So let's look at this example. This is a reader, and this one is a little longer for a reader. It's like probably 20-25 seconds here. And that way we have all of our bases covered as far as our example sections for what we would have. Now, remember some other ways that you could write reader at the beginning. If you notice, we have that command line right here that says reader. You could have on cam right there, or RDR, which also stands for reader, or you could just put anchor in there if you're a station that still works with anchors, and that would work too. So we start with a huge wildfire in eastern Arizona is expected to spread to New Mexico. Okay, so that's our main point, that we're telling our audience that this fire is expected to spread to New Mexico. Both wind and dry lightning are forecast over the next 2 days. Arizona fire officials say more than 1,000 firefighters are working the blaze. There have been no serious injuries, but hundreds of people have been evacuated and 11 buildings have been destroyed. The fire has burned more than 350 square miles. This is the third largest wildfire in Arizona's history. Okay, so let's break that down a little more. As I said, of course, our first line is going to be our lead, and that is a huge wildfire. The subject of the story in eastern Arizona gives us our location, so the where is expected to spread to New Mexico, and this is the story's latest development. Again, in broadcasts, we're often focusing the most on whatever the latest development is, if there has been a development, or occasionally if there's a story where they're not being a development in the story is the development, that can also happen. Now, our backup for this, because remember we had a backup section, and this correlates to kind of could be a combination of things, either that bridge background that we had before, or the body section from our inverted pyramid. So you want to think of those kinds of details where we're looking at why and how. So in this case, we're answering the question of why is it expected to spread? So why is this development happening? And it says both wind and dry lightning are forecast over the next 2 days. So that is why the fire is expected to spread. And another thing to think of, just real quick, whenever we're thinking about what to include right after the lead, think about what makes the most sense. What questions would you have as the person hearing this information? Like, what's happening? Where is it happening? Why is this happening? And in this case, the why is our big question following that information we've been given from the lead. So after, in this case, since we're focusing on such a large area and such a large and serious event, we include our why and how in there, and then the who. Since we don't have any serious injuries in this, the who becomes part of our like details and background section. So it blends into the story a little more, even though, again, these are important details. It's why they're still included in here, but they aren't as important to the overall story as the as that main section was, where we were talking about what happened, where it's happening, and why it's happening. So Arizona fire officials, they're our sources of information. So remember, we want our audience to trust us by giving them the source of our information. Where did we find this information? How did we find out that this thing is happening? That we actually found legitimate sources of information for this. So we are telling our audience, hey, Arizona fire officials say more than 1,000 firefighters are working the blaze. And they're part of our who as well, because they're people who are risking their lives to go help these other people. I mean, yeah, it's their job, but it's also important to acknowledge and include them in here. And we have, there have been no serious injuries, but hundreds of people have been evacuated. So this is the impact of the fire on people. So again, we're building that who section out of who's involved, who's been impacted. And 11 buildings have been destroyed. So this is the physical damage that's happened because of this. It isn't just happening like out in the desert somewhere where no people or animals or anything have been impacted. We do have a direct impact to the people in this area. And then our background section, we have the fire has burned more than 350 square miles. It's the third largest wildfire in Arizona's history. So this gives us some perspective as audience members. We can say, okay, this is a big deal. It isn't something that happens every day. It isn't like some of the other fires that you may have heard of when they do have a small fire in an area where, if you didn't get it before by the hundreds of people being evacuated and the buildings that were destroyed, yeah, I mean, for someone living in a city, maybe 11 buildings doesn't sound like that many. But if you think about the square mileage and the size of the fire in terms of Arizona, like this is the third largest in Arizona's history, that's a pretty big deal. So it helps the audience to understand the impact again, and give them some perspective of why this is being reported, why this is important. So here's a question to consider whenever you're working on these kinds of stories. Where might you add natural sounds or a quote? Like, how would you include natural sounds, quotes. If you're working in video media, what kind of video would you include? Again, it kind of depends on what you have available to you, but it's also important to consider what sounds would make the most impact for your audience. Like, do you have some sounds from the firefighters who are working the blaze? Do you have, usually you have a lot of, you have trees that start cracking and the wind, if we're talking about wind and dry lightning, were you able to pick up some of those sounds? Or if there are choppers that are dropping dirt on the fire to try and smother it. Maybe you could have something from that if you include it in your story. So think about what you're including as far as your words go, and then also what sounds can you include in there. And remember, when we're reporting news events, these have to be things that actually happened and were from this location. This can't just be uh, some footage that you have from another fire or audio that you have from another event that happened. You want to keep it real, keep it true to what is actually happening here. And sometimes that means that you have maybe fewer sources as far as natural sounds go, or quotes or things at first, until you're able to get in touch with the public information officer from the fire department or from that particular group, whatever it is that you're discussing. But you want to be honest in your reporting, both in the video that you're including, the audio that you're including, and including sources of information that give you the most probability of including something accurately. So a couple of other things that you might include in here, of course. So in addition to natural sounds, we have direct quotes that we could have. The public information officer from the fire department would be one. Someone who lived in the area or lives in the area and was evacuated. That could be another person, so we could include them in here as well. Or you could even include them as a SOT at the beginning, so include that soundbite at the beginning of your story and explain what's going on. If you're talking about it in terms of the people who've been evacuated, that could be a different perspective to give the story. Or talking to someone who researches wildfires, maybe they have some information about why why or how this happened, aside from the obvious wind and dry lightning. Is there like something else that they want to include in there? So consider different sources that you can include in here, depending on your focal point in your lead. Now, I want you to go listen to some news reports and think about how they're reporting this information. And when I say news reports, yes, definitely traditional media, great sources for information. If you look at local news outlets as well, see how they're including information in their reports, and ask yourself, how do these descriptions and sounds help me understand the story? How are they helping me to see what's here? Or maybe they aren't. Maybe whatever they included isn't helping very much, or they didn't make a strong enough connection between the what's happening in like the lead and the written part of the story and the soundbite that they included. And you want to make sure that everything is moving together in a way that you can easily understand and relate all of these elements together. And it's good when, especially any kind of writing, really, for you to go and review things, see what's happening that you think is going really well and what maybe needs a little work. And you can use that to help you with your own writing.